That Epicenter is in Ohio, where officials say they are on track for 10,000 overdose deaths.
Bill Whitaker went to the heartland. He met Ohio families seeing the impact.
Well, heroin has been around for more than a century, but the abuse of it has exploded.
Black market fentanyl.
Used legal, but now manufactured.
We told you last week that the DEA is starting a new program
In May, the county almost passed last year's total number of deaths. Officials estimate in May, the county also passed last year's
Dayton, Ohio is a mid-sized Midwestern city with a population of less than 200,000. However, in recent years, it has become the center for one of the worst drug epidemics in U.S. history.
I became a cop in '92, and back then, I mean, crack cocaine was king. Crack had really taken over the Miami Valley and the country, by storm.
Opioids, a type of drug typically attributed to pain relief. Some of them can be prescribed, like Oxycontin and Vicodin. Others are illegally manufactured, like heroin, and its more dangerous synthetic counterparts, fentanyl and carfentanil. 80% of people with an opioid addiction started with pills.
So we were good patients, and you go to the doctor and they give you a bottle of Vicodin for your toothache, and we're good patients and we think, hey, we got to take this bottle to be healed. And truth is, we were tricked.
Dayton resident Billy Brockschmidt leads local support group Families of Addicts. This organization educates and supports families and individuals struggling with addiction. Billy is a recovering addict who has been clean for 2 years.
A long time ago, I was in the Air Force, and I had to have a series of operations done on my kidney, and I was on convalescent leave off and on for about 18 months. During that time, I was getting at least 100 Percocets a month, and whenever I ran out, I would just ask for more. So at the end of that 18 months, I was, of course, hopelessly addicted.
Ohio's government tried to intervene by regulating these handouts, but this made Dayton's situation worse.
The state came around and said, okay, there's all this influx of too much being prescribed, so they shut down what they called the pill mills, because there were doctors that were prescribing inappropriately. If you cut off that supply, where are you going to go? So it just was open forum for dealers and people that aren't doing good things to kind of take advantage of a vulnerable group.
Interstates 70 and 75 intersect just north of Dayton, making the region a meeting point for opioid traffickers headed towards major cities across the U.S.
Drug traffickers, to include cartels, they began to direct source heroin right to Dayton, Ohio, and other small cities throughout the country. So it provided almost an endless supply of heroin.
So there's a lot of games played, a lot of people being forced into this trade. Some people are just poor and they'll drive down and pick up a load and bring it up here and make some money.
This is one of only 2 places I've ever seen here in Chicago where they will actually give you free samples, right? They'll give you, they call them testers, right? They'll give you a tester and a phone number and say, hey, if you like this, give me a call back. I can have dope delivered here faster than a pizza could get here.
In Dayton, heroin is not only accessible, but very cheap.
What we spend $10 on here in Dayton, where I used to live in Florida, would cost you about $40.
Poverty-stricken, unemployed, and desperate are stereotypes of a heroin addict, although that's not always the case. The National Center of Addiction and Substance Abuse defines addiction as a complex disease of the brain and body that involves compulsive use of a substance, despite serious health and social consequences. Nearly 600,000 people from across the nation, from all walks of life, suffer from this illness.
Drug use can happen in any industry, and it can happen among basically any age group.
Will Garby is a local reporter who has been focused on this topic for the past year, including the story of an airline pilot and his wife who died of an overdose.
This particular case, when they died together. They died in their bedroom. They were found by their children. It isn't necessarily impacting one group or another. This is a crisis that knows no demographic.
Dayton native Tiffany Clark has been in recovery for 6 years.
Getting into it was from my soulmate, and he had been using for a long time. And eventually he let me in on what was going on and why he was kind of grumpy sometimes, and said that I might like it and it might be good for my very high energy personality. And it definitely knocked me out.
I've probably spent most of the last 15 years just pissed off at him.
Drugs affect more than just the user. Mark McKiernan's son, Michael, began experimenting with drugs at an early age. Michael's addictions have strained their relationship for much of his adult life.
I've come to a much greater understanding of somebody that's addicted, of it's still their choice to stick a needle in their arm, but the battle of actually stopping is something I would never want to have to deal with.
Heroin causes the release of dopamine in the brain. This chemical is responsible for the feeling of happiness, and when introduced, increases that level 5 to 10 times from the norm. When addicted, the body depends on constant elevated levels of dopamine, and without that stimulation, an addict experiences extreme withdrawal symptoms.
A lot of people think that that you have a choice, you know, and maybe at some point there was, but if you're in active addiction, at that point you certainly no longer have a choice.
The stigma that's associated is it's your own individual moral failing. Like, you're weak and you can't control this addiction, whereas it's actually something in your brain. There's a chemistry. The chemistry is not right.
Oxytocin is pure love. It's what you feel with like breastfeeding or between a mother and a child. And so heroin is just one of those that at a certain point you realize, like, this is part of my identity.
Even when addicts wish to quit, they must continue their cycle of drug use in order to prevent illness and withdrawal symptoms known as being dope sick.
If you think about the worst flu you've ever had, imagine that times like 200 or 300.
You see the blood come up in the syringe and go back, and there's this weird thing in you that says for a moment, like, I have control of living or dying now, and I win. I won again.
Every addict knows how deadly it is and how small an amount is potentially deadly, but they'll do it because they know it'll keep them from getting sick.
You have folks who love their children, but they would take heroin over their kids 10 out of 10 times. It's that big a draw for them. So
I was getting I love you messages every day, every hour of the day for years, and the day went by with no messages, so I knew. And I had sent my sister over to the house, and he had been dead for an hour when she found him. He didn't try to, he had taken just as much as before, but he also had the methadone in his system, and we were already taking too much, plus the methadone, plus his heart was just done.
You know, I'm a firm believer that they won't get help until they actually truly want help. You know, you have to sometimes hit rock bottom before you're ready for help.
I kept using and lying and cheating and stealing for about 2 years. People notice, your job notices when you steal from them, so I got fired, and my best friend got me pregnant, and I was still using.
In 2014, Dayton police officers started carrying Narcan due to the prevalence of opioid overdoses. Narcan is usually given as a nasal spray that immediately reverses the effects of an overdose.
On the street, they call it Jesus juice because it like resurrects them from the dead.
But the problem is it's a Band-Aid. So, you know, we revive you, you get up, and 30% of the time when we're in an overdose scene, the person walks off. They're upset, we ruined their high, and then they'll go get high again. There's times we have the same person 2 or 3 times that day.
Whether you want to see them a part of a family or not, they are a part of a family and a community. So they are impacting someone. Think of, if you don't want to save that person, think of the kid. If they're a parent of someone, that child has to live without that parent.
He's like having a kid that has terminal cancer. And he has to make the decision to be clean. But there's nothing I can do about it. I can help him, I can love him, I can support him, but it's like you're just waiting for the call, or you're waiting that he's gone. If he died, it would obviously be the worst day of my life, but I can't live my life based on whether he dies or not.
Due to this crisis, all aspects of the community have changed. In response, Dayton's police force began to focus more of its efforts to solve this problem.
Oh, it's consuming 75% of our workload.
And we had citizens who were upset as well because, you know, they felt that their needs weren't being met by the police department.
Mid-2017, we were doing 15 overdoses a day in Montgomery County. So we ended up with 3,537 overdoses last year. That was very taxing on all of our EMS, fire, and police services. Hospitals were overloaded.
The backlog becomes inevitable because so many people are dying. In Montgomery County, the coroner's office here does autopsies and toxicology screenings for many surrounding counties.
It's the repetitiveness of it. It's the same story of the addiction and seeing potential intervention points that weren't taken advantage of or couldn't be taken advantage of because they didn't know the resource even existed. So watching that same story of, you know, the progression of the addiction takes an emotional toll.
It's an incredibly expensive crisis as well, not just in the cost of life, but in the cost of basically tackling and responding to overdoses.
So this has no limits of where it reaches, and it completely destroys families.
The effect that it was having specifically on my mother, right? So she was doing things that she didn't want to do.
Never give them money. Never.
She knew it was wrong, but I'm her son, she loves me. What's she gonna, you know, and if I come to her and say, Mom, I'm hungry.
If you want to give them a sandwich or whatever, yes.
Even if she would just give me food, right? Well, that's money that I don't have to spend on food now.
Then they have other money that they'll use to buy drugs.
Most folks, you know, when this issue started, there was no place for them to go. I mean, you know, waiting 3 weeks to get into a treatment facility for a heroin addict is eternity.
Now we are, fast forward to 2018, we have a lot of our systems working together here.
Members of the community have banded together to help this situation. Some of the organizations include CarePoint, Conversation for Change, and Families of Addicts.
It's really trying to put all those pieces together and help not only the individual, but the family and the community as a whole.
Although the path to recovery is difficult, the challenge is worth the result.
I've heard before that when you're coming clean from heroin, it's like if you have that feeling of when you're sitting on your leg and your foot gets numb and then it starts to tingle and you're like, oh, I can feel again. Well, it's that times a million, but in your emotions too. And I took my obsession for heroin or for sadness or whatever it was, and I became obsessed with making a better life.
I think he's working on 7 months clean. We have as good of a relationship as I know to have. I don't trust him as far as I could throw him. He knows I love him.
So I was introduced to Billy about a year and a half ago, and this is when we were starting GROW, Getting Recovery Options Working. What we're looking at is the effectiveness of peers changing this epidemic, and we've seen him reach hundreds of people.
The only thing I try to tell people in early recovery is to have fun. Find something you enjoy and do it. You know, if all you're doing is just following a program and you're not taking time to enjoy your life, you're probably not gonna, the odds are against you. So that's what I try to tell people is have fun.
And he's just got the right attitude. He really believes it will work.
If you drive around through Dayton, some of the bridges will have these murals and paintings underneath them and around them. Well, that's all done by this girl named Tiffany, and that artwork is her recovery.
Her passion for the recovery movement and just what an example that recovery does work.
We all have these lock and keys that need filled. And if sometimes I'm having to go to too many meetings and doing things where I'm not making art, I find the sadness start to grow. So as long as I can be continuously as self-aware as possible, I can dance that lovely balance we all try to.